Welcome back to our program. I again want to welcome and acknowledge some of the new stations that have come on board the Common Sense Network. Great station up in the New York, New Jersey area, KVNJ 1160 AM. That's in Teaneck, New Jersey. That covers all of New York City and a good bit of New Jersey, a huge station up there. Glad to have you folks up there joining our network. Down in New Orleans, my neck of the woods, KAGY 1510 AM down New Orleans. Glad to have you folks join us. And of course, we broadcast from our flagship station, WJBO, Clear Channel Radio in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, going to stations from coast to coast all over America. By the way, July, this special month of July, do you know that in July you've got 5 Fridays, 5 Saturdays, and 5 Sundays? That doesn't happen. That happens about once every 900 years. I just happened to see all the Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays where there's 5, and got checking, went into Wikipedia and found out that happens once every 823 years. Little fact there for you. Supreme Court came down this week with a very disturbing decision on a 7-2 vote written by Justice Scalia, basically saying this, that the First Amendment protects some of the most vicious, outrageous violence in video games you could imagine. The court says yes to violence, but a kid can't go buy, at 17, can't go buy a Playboy magazine, but you can see the worst type of violence you can possibly imagine on the screen, on the video screen. And I mean, we're talking about blood splattering, gushing, ripping people apart, rape, mayhem of the worst kind of violence you could ever imagine. That's okay, the Supreme Court says. You know, the Supreme Court lives in their own little world. They don't Twitter, they don't Facebook, and you don't have to do that, but they're very protected with security guards. I don't think they see the damage that is caused by the interaction. And let me tell you what I mean. When you read a book, there's violence in Grimm's fairy tales and Snow White, in the versions of a number of things that kids can read. They're reading it, and hopefully there's some parental responsibility in what works and what doesn't work. But with video games, it's interactive. The kid decides who he wants to rape, who he wants to murder, who he wants to split apart in the most violent way. He makes the decision, or she makes the decision. And therefore, it's a training for you. Look, our kids are not born, the ones who get into real serious trouble, they're not born that way. They learn. They learn from their friends. They learn from a lack of parental guidance. They learn as they grow. And if you give the child that tool in a video game to where they say, I've got options. It's okay to rip someone apart and to kill them and to rape them and mayhem. That's okay. It's in the video game. What kind of a lesson is that? Then you've got the argument, well, what about the states' rights argument? This is California's choice. California made the decision they wanted to ban these video games, as states should be allowed to do. I thought we had states' rights, no more in this country, one standard across the board. The supposedly conservative Supreme Court says that's out the window. Everybody's got to be treated the same. No state can make those decisions in terms of how they judge their citizens. That's a real problem with that decision. The interaction deeply concerns me. And then, of course, you're saying, well, you can't limit kids. Well, does that mean now that a 9-year-old can drive? Because that's a freedom of expression, driving a car. We don't let a kid drive. We tell them they have to go to school. We put a number of restrictions on young people these days in terms of what they can do and what they can't do. They can't drink alcohol till you're 18. You can't smoke until you're 18. So we have all these requirements we put on. But when it comes to this violent, terrible act, oh, that violates freedom of speech. And I think it's just a terrible, terrible decision down by the U.S. Supreme Court. Not much you can do about it. The video game producers pushed it very, very hard because they have an economic reason. They want to make all the money. That's why they push so hard to make these games legal and paid for the lawyers to fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. The justices got this wrong. Clarence Thomas, bless his soul, who's probably the most incompetent member of the Supreme Court, actually said, no, that is not proper. But the conservative members of the Supreme Court overwhelmingly said, oh, freedom of speech, mayhem, violence, let it go. Young people can do anything they want, and it comes down to Hopefully there's some parental guidance right there, because right now the morals and mores that society should be able to impose state by state have been thrown out the window. It's got nothing to do with free expression, freedom of speech. It comes down to just good common sense. And in the U.S. Supreme Court this week, in this terrible decision, you didn't see that common sense. Jim Brown here. I'll be right back.